over again. It's always such a pleasure. Remember when you tried to kill me twice?
I'm Levi Weinhagen, and this is the Pratfalls podcast. The music you can hear right now is Want You Gone by Jonathan Colton. Go and buy this song. Seriously, I'll wait. Did you buy it? Great. This is my conversation with visual artist Kate Renee. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you guys will enjoy it as well. Hey, don't forget, you can tell folks about this show, the Pratfalls podcast. You can listen to past episodes. The last one before this was my conversation with Jeff Lynne. You can also listen to my conversation with Gregory Parks, Liz Georgie, John Heimbuch. And I've got a bunch more already recorded and more stuff scheduled. I'm really excited to keep recording these conversations and sharing them with you guys. And I'm really liking hearing back. Folks have been tweeting about things that they like, that change in the show, the conversations, the things that we're talking about. So please let me know. And don't forget, you can rate and review the show on iTunes. It really helps it a lot. So go on iTunes and give us a nice review. I will say thank you on a future episode if you do so. Enough about that. Here's my conversation with Kate Renee. You're Kate Renee.
Yep, that's
Sweet.
me.
And I'm curious if what do you say to the question of what do you make? Like, how do you describe yourself?
I start off with saying that I make twisted Disney princesses, and that usually is like the hook for people to be like, what is that? And I talk about my past series called Beauties Behaving Badly, which is using the characters from fairy tales rather than Disney as like the basis of the painting itself. And then I pair them with politics and society, feminism and cultural things that are happening, and kind of show the princesses or characters in a new light. Once people get interested, then I talk about my next series, which is similar, and it's the 7 Deadly Sins. So when I start off with like it's twisted princesses, they want to know more, and then we get into like the resin and the layering and all that. So you
start with sort of the pitch of what the product is, and then you can get into process if they like find that compelling.
And the process is usually the thing that gets people interested once I get them in the studio. I usually like to have something in progress, and I say, hey, come on in, like I'll show you what I'm working on. And once they see what it looks like, they're really interested in knowing the technical aspect, even if they're not artists.
Because there's a layering quality to your work. Like it's are you intentional about people being able to see that there's been sort of some human action taken? You know, I think some artists will try to make something so that you can't see the work put into it, and some artists are totally comfortable with a little bit of process being left in their work. Do you think you fall one side or the other?
I think I'm right in the middle. I used to hide my process, but now I'm more open about showing like a painting in progress, but I want the finished piece to look very polished. And the way I pour the resin on the painting, you can't see the brush stroke. It's very opaque. So I'm fine talking about the process and showing people how I layer and create that 3D effect in my work. But when I'm done, I want it to look polished and a little bit a step away from my hand.
Yeah.
So it's both.
What about just more broadly, if someone, I don't like the question of like, what do you do? Because it's fraught with problems. Because, it's embedded with who are you or why do you matter. But, do you just identify as I'm an artist? Do you subcategorize, like I'm a visual artist? Like, what do you...
I'll say I'm a painter.
Yeah.
So I'm an artist, I'm a painter. I'm a small business owner. I am a protege, I have a mentor.
I love that word, protege. Does that feel like a heavy to be a protege? Does that feel like you have fun. To... You like it? It's not? Okay. Wasn't like... I don't know, that's... you have to live up to something. Like, do you like expectations? Yeah, that's a question I like.
Yeah. I mean, I have a mentor through the WARM, the Women's Art Resources Minnesota. Me and my mentor, Jill Waterhouse, worked together for 2 years, and I've kind of graduated and stepped away from that. But she's always going to be my mentor, and I'll always have her there. And our relationship was more like a walk forward, but like hand-holding, or like a parallel force of guidance versus like, here's your list and these are your expectations. It's more guidance and helping you figure out what your path is and making sure you stay on that path if that's what you want to do. So she's been super helpful, and she is the person who helped me through the Beauties Behaving Badly series.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't mind being a protege. I really like it.
Were you know, the Beauties Behaving Badly, I will say part of why I was interested in talking to you is, could just be my perception, but one thing that I see in your work is you do a thing I tend to really like, where you take something that could be seen as light or fluffy and then try to take it fairly seriously, which I think, to me, is where the best sort of comedy comes from, and then more broadly, the best art comes from either taking something silly really seriously or taking something serious and being really silly with it. Like, those
That's
are
exactly
my
what
two
my art
things.
is.
Oh, good. Okay.
The children love it. They're like, Mom, look, it's Winnie the Pooh. And
then it twists.
Then the
get
parent
closer.
gets the funny, like, humor to it, or the dark side,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah, well, that's not quite the Winnie the Pooh that I know, you know. So, yeah, kids really like the princesses. I've only had one child, like, look at it and see that it's not real or not the princess that they know, and she was like, Dad, I don't like this art. I don't like it, Dad. And she was so upset and mad, and the dad was trying to apologize. I'm like, no, like, that's what my art's supposed to do. Like, you don't have to like it or, you know, understand, you know, there's like a pretty princess quality to it, and then there's the dark side. So if you see both, even if you're like 5 years old, that's great. Then my art's done its purpose.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, the idea of you just want a reaction.
Yeah.
Just nothing is the worst.
Yeah.
They don't care either way. Well, then that feels like failure more than I hate this.
Yeah.
Sweet. I moved you in some way. Do you remember sort of the path of deciding to focus on the way you're making work now? Like, they're, you know, mixing paint and resin. It's not like no one's done that before, but it seems like there could be some risk in. Did you start off as a traditional, like, acrylic on canvas, or
No.
How did you get to where you are now? Like, what did your creativity look like
So
when you were, I don't know, 10 or 15 or however far back?
Yeah, I've always been an artist, and I hopped around 3 different colleges deciding what I wanted to do. I went to Iowa to Luther College for a semester and decided I did not want to be a Baroque artist. But before that, I did college and high school. So Luther was my second college, and when I decided, I'm like, this is it, I have to be an artist. I don't want to do anything else. I went to the U of M, and that's where I got my art degree. I took only one painting class, and I absolutely hated it. It was like a 4-hour Wednesday night class, and we painted still lifes and mixed paint, and it was just like the worst thing ever. My final piece for that class, I painted the octopus. That's kind of like my marketing little symbol.
The green,
that little green guy that everyone sees. So it's on my blog, it's on my business card. The little octopus is what I painted for my final project. And it wasn't what I proposed for my final project, so when I showed up, he was like, oh, this isn't what we talked about. And I'm like, nope, it isn't. So I kind of crafted this story about the meaning behind it, which the meaning behind it was like the first step into what I'm making now. Like, it had a lot more meaning than I thought it would, but I kind of crafted this great story about how it had this other meaning and symbolism for my life at that time, which wasn't true.
So you were sort of trying to justify
why I showed up with a project that wasn't what we talked about.
Yeah.
I got an A and a pass, but painting class was the worst. So I painted that octopus, and I had a jellyfish, and from there I started creating these characters with googly eyes and bright colors. And I was painting on foam core. A student who, I think we had like an internship together, mentioned how he was painting on foam core, and it allowed it to be really smooth, and I liked that idea, but I didn't know what else to use going forward. Like, I knew foam core dent really easy and wasn't the best.
Yeah.
But I painted on that for about 2 years.
And it has a almost 3D quality, but not.
Yeah.
Which is.
And I could keep the brush strokes really smooth. I could keep like the paint really opaque with that solid white background. So it worked for what I was trying to do at the time. But everything was really kind of cute. So everything was just like, oh, a cute little octopus. Oh, this is like a toaster and some cute toast. So it's kind of like Japanese characters, like a Hello Kitty. It was just kind of fun and cute. And then when I was getting into the War Mentor program is kind of when I wanted to have a little more twist to things. It was kind of brewing in the back of my head, like, hey, I could pack a little more punch if I talked about these things, but I'm not sure how to do that. And the first piece I did in the War Mentor program is the pug piece that's on my wall. It's just cute dogs. It's just pugs. But I just went out.
Pugs.
Yeah, five cute pugs. But I went out and bought this big board, this wood birch panel, and thought, I'm just going to start painting on birch. And when I try something new, I kind of like go big or go home. So I bought this like $80 piece of wood and just decided to paint on it, and I was going to paint something cute. And I also was like, resin's kind of cool. Let's just mix them up and pour it over this painting. So I spent all this time making this cute painting and just, like gooped all this resin on and just hoped that it worked.
Because you didn't know until it sort of hardened what it would look like.
Yeah, and I was pouring this in my parents' dining room on a carpeted floor.
Did you put something down?
I did, but I was, at the time I didn't have a studio and was trying new things, so I had this like plastic apparatus trying to prevent dust from dropping on it and trying to not get resin on the carpet. So it was a big step in that I was having this urge to have a new direction. I was using a new substrate for my paintings, and I was trying this new chemical resin technique on it. And then from there, I got the Minnesota State Arts Board grant, and that's where I jumped into the beauties. So everything's kind of evolved. And then my latest evolution is with the 3D painting, and that was, again, just kind of jumping into it. I didn't know how it would look, what the process would be, if like the layering technique would work for my work, but this was my test painting, which is Gluttony, which is the Winnie the Pooh piece that's in Minnesota Monthly, and I created this kind of three-dimensional paint by number strategy to try to get what I had in my mind down, and so it worked. So I'm doing the whole 7 sins to create the rest of the series. So everything's kind of been like gung-ho, go all in, see what happens.
Well, so I'm curious, you said go big or go home. Do you have any that you can think of go home moments? Like, are there things you tried and maybe it ultimately did lead to a good result, but there was moments where you were like, oh, I just ruined a bunch of work, or this is not the direction I want to go? What are your biggest weaknesses? That feels like that.
Yeah, that's probably a better question, because I don't have any like big failure moments. I
you have
know
time.
myself.
There's still time. To fail.
I know myself well enough that I can problem solve eventually through a piece. Last week I had a bad resin pour, and that was my first bad pour ever. And how to come back from a sticky painting and how to recover it.
What would constitute? I mean, I'm sure there's people who know tons about it. All I know is, if I ever worked with resin, it would be full of my fingerprints because I would touch it way too much and ruin it. So what constitutes a bad pour? Like, what was the circumstance?
Something didn't mix right. It was a bad chemical, and
so the consistency was wrong?
Yeah, part of the painting was super sticky, and you can't keep pouring or working with it when you have a sticky surface. It's supposed to be hard. So working through that was just like, okay, what can I do? What could I start with? What tools do I have in my studio to try to get this up and get it smoothed down to how it was before? So I can usually work through any like studio problems. Sometimes it takes a couple days or a couple weeks and a lot of frustration, but I know that if I keep working at something, a small problem that's art related will get resolved. But as far as like, I don't remember how you phrased it, but things I need to work on or things...
Well, I sort of jokingly was like your weaknesses.
No, weaknesses, yes, that's a good question.
You don't have to list them.
I think it's perfectionism. Especially in the studio. I want things to be top-notch.
Yeah.
I don't want to look like I don't have anything together. I want to look like everything's smooth and fine, even if I have like little stumbles here or there. So perfectionism with the work itself, and perfectionism with like how my studio looks or how my business is run, or do all the numbers add up in my finances. Like I want everything in my art business to be perfect, and that's not realistic at all. So balancing that like perceived expectation that I need to be perfect and the reality of what's going on is kind of my artistic weakness.
Well, yeah, I'm curious because vulnerability is really important in doing creative work, but sort of what you're describing is ways of avoiding vulnerability, which can be, I mean, it's important to have times when being professional about your business, maybe that's not the best place to inject too much vulnerability.
Yeah.
Although I think collaborative opportunities come up and it becomes a vulnerable professional relationship. I'm sure that happened with your mentor, where that's a professional relationship, but there has to be moments of vulnerability for growth and change. So I wonder how you think about I don't know if it's a dichotomy, but the butting heads between you trying to make work that has meaning to you and could connect with other people as well, but also trying to have it execute exactly how you want it to look. Like, are there times when it doesn't work out, but the result is good because it didn't work out in a way that you had to be a little exposed about?
I think the exposure comes from wanting to paint things I would normally not feel comfortable painting. Maybe, for example, The Beauties Behaving Badly talk about teenage pregnancy and the way the United States treats addicts and like topics that are hard to talk about, but I use my art to say like, hey, I want to talk about these things, and I can talk about it in a visual way. And so I think being in a gallery and someone coming up to me and asking me, hey, like, why do you paint about drugs? Do you have a drug addiction? Right there, that's a moment of vulnerability. And so then I have to own up to it. Like, no, I don't, but I want to talk about it. I want to use my artwork to talk about these things. So I think that's where the vulnerability comes to. And now that I've created this, now I have to speak to it. What is this about, you know?
Do you see how much of yourself do you think is in a lot of the work you've put out so far? Like I don't know if it's your personal story or like, do you feel those connections?
I feel very connected to the characters that I pick and how I relate them to the overall story I'm trying to tell. So I'm picking Winnie the Pooh because I grew up with him. I understand his character, and I'm picking the 7 Sins because I grew up religious, and I can connect those two things and see that and how I can create the artwork. Specifically, Winnie the Pooh is about gluttony, and I'm not, overweight or have a problem with overeating and gluttony. But I think, there's a conversation that could be had as far as like eating in America and our health.
Or even consumption.
Yeah, consumption.
Not just food-based.
Totally. So I can put myself in the piece because I want to talk about these things, but I clearly am not a glutton myself. So I'm probably in them half the time.
Yeah, your personal self.
Yeah.
Well, so you're a woman, as far as I can tell.
Yes, I am.
And doing something like the Beauties series can seem like a really strong feminist act.
Totally.
But I bet there also could be some anxiety about, isn't it cute that woman artist is doing something with princesses? Like it seems like there's some risk involved there too.
I think so, yeah.
How aware are you of trying to be sort of speaking directly to, I don't know if it's just the broad gender inequalities in the country and the world, or is that an important piece of the work you make?
Totally. Yeah. The Beauties is very kind of feminist-laced series. Being a part of WARM is a feminist group. That's how I found my mentor. I've been a part of the WCA, which is the Women's Caucus for Art, and I'm showing in a couple exhibitions with the Guerrilla Girls Takeover that's happening in January and February. So I'm proud to be a woman artist, and I think it's really important to put yourself out there as a feminist. And I think The Beauties is a very feminist series. But that's not my purpose as being an artist, is to have this like feminist force out in the world, because sometimes I just like to be myself and hide out in my studio and make some art, So my whole purpose is not to be like, I am woman, hear me roar, but
You're not an activist.
Yeah, but I think it's important to be like, yeah, I am a feminist and I'm an artist, and it's important. And
I like the normalizing quality to that.
Yeah.
I think real progress is when it no longer feels like a big deal.
Yeah.
You just feel like, that isn't the main point of anything. It's just there.
Yeah.
I think that's, particularly in feminism and sort of racial equality, that stuff will seem like less of a big, huge issue when it's around and no one has to comment on it.
Yeah, like I don't feel like I have to push that on anyone, but I still feel like it's important to share with other people that I am a feminist. So if people see like this is how I'm acting or behaving, this is the kind of artwork I'm making, then yeah, it's normal. And so other people can be like, oh, maybe this stuff is important, and it's not this like big thing. It's part of all of us. So
you had relationships with mentors already. Do you look down the road and think of ways where you can then sort of offer that yourself? Like, are you currently, or are you looking for opportunities where you can, I don't know if it's share knowledge or share resources? You've gotten yourself to a place where you have a studio and you have tools, and is that something you want to include in your work?
Totally. So someday I'll be maybe a life coach, some sort of mentor, but something in the arts.
Because you offer other, I know on your website
So right now I do consultations.
Yeah.
The consultations is kind of like the stepping stone between me as an artist working in my studio now and being a mentor someday. I think I need like some sort of middle ground to kind of figure out what my mentorship would look like or what my kind of philosophy or teaching strategy would be. So I do consultations for kind of emerging artists who need help with their business. So I can help with setting up Etsy shops and Facebook pages and setting goals, things to do to get your studio ready for an open studio event. Basically like business 101 things that I've figured out and want to share, because a lot of these things I had to learn on my own, either by like
doing
trial
them wrong.
or doing them wrong, or trial or error, or reading lots of books. So it's pretty natural for me to want to teach and train other people, and so I do consultations for artists. They're only $20 an hour because usually this kind of help gets expensive, and as an emerging artist you can't afford a lot of help.
Right.
So that's what I do in my free time when I'm not in the studio. And then I also do workshops at the Bloomington Arts Center, which is now called Artistry. So I usually do different topics there too that are more business arts related.
Are there ways you feel like that offering those things and then actually doing those, working with artists and doing workshops, do you feel like it informs your creative work and or your professional sort of business? Like, do you come back? I know you're giving things out, but do you feel like you're feeding off of some of that stuff too?
I feed off being around other creative people and meeting and talking like this, or grabbing coffee with an artist or talking them through like a process. It also helps give me a window in like what people don't actually know or kind of struggling through. Like just in Minneapolis as an artist, like a lot of people don't know some of these easy business things that I've learned, and so I kind of want to like share my knowledge.
What's an easy business thing a lot of people don't take advantage of? Do you have an example? Asking for a friend.
There's a nonprofit organization called SCORE, SCORE, and they have business mentors for absolutely free that you can have when you start up a small business. And from what I've done a little bit of work with them, but that's the easiest way that an artist trying to start off a business could get going, is they pair you with someone who's been in business or worked with a company for a very long time.
And they're not necessarily artists.
They're not necessarily
entrepreneurs
artists.
And business people.
But if you need help with finances or marketing, these people will sit down for free and mentor you.
Nice.
So,
I like that.
it's a tip.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's solid. So you talked about pouring resin in your family's dining room. Did you grow up in a home where like making work and being creative was totally normal? And is your family, are they engaged in creative work regularly?
We're all creative, but we have very different creative facets. So I'm the only painter with the studio. My sister does graphic design and web coding, so she's designed my website.
Nice.
She likes
That's
to do,
nice to have.
Yeah. She does some more kind of crafty, artsy things on the side too, but her main focus is like the web presence. My mom does scrapbooking and quilting and hobbies like that, and then my dad does photography, and he is the one who does my prints. So everyone in my core family is artists in some way.
Who can aid in your work.
Yes, but I do pay them for their services. So
good. I like that model of, you got to keep paying artists when you can. I think it's changing, but the idea of becoming a professional artist is a little scary because of a lot of reasons, but financial insecurity is one of the big ones. It can be very hard to make a sustainable income as just an artist.
Yeah.
And I know you have work with organizations, which I'm sure both feeds you creatively, but also helps cover that. So you're building your professional skills, but also you can, have health insurance or whatever.
Yep.
Was there a moment where you, don't know, it's not like coming out or something, but like you announced to your family, I'm going to be an artist like as my job. Like I'm always curious about those conversations because there can be times where a parent, even if they're like, I want you to be happy and creative, but also are like, does this mean you're going to live in our basement forever? Have you experienced any, is it full on like, yeah, go for it, no worries? Or have you had any like,
no,
what's your plan?
There have been questions like, what's your plan, or what are you doing? You need a job with the 401k and health insurance, but like they've always understood that being an artist is my passion. And I think through action I've been able to show how to make it work and how to balance. My day job has a creative aspect to it, so that helps kind of feed that part of me.
Yeah, you work in the arts during the day too. I mean, during the day job.
The day job is retail.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm a merchandiser, so I make a store look cool.
Oh yeah, but that's very like there's an aesthetic quality.
But
to
the ultimate goal is to work in arts and nonprofits for my day job.
My ultimate goal is to be just merchandiser. Nothing.
But yeah, so I think the only part that kind of sticks out as far as having like a conversation about like where are you going in life is when I decided like, hey, I don't want to be at Luther College anymore. Like I want to be an artist, and I can't afford to be an artist if I'm spending $30,000 a year. Like that's not setting myself up for success. So deciding to like pack up everything, move mid-year to a brand new college, and be like, hey, I'm an artist, was kind of that moment, I guess.
Yeah. Getting the arts degree, did you consider just leaving school altogether and just going full bore into making your work, or was that never even a consideration?
No, it's always been an expectation to have a job. I think now doing the consultation and finally selling some work and getting some press and some shows, that's kind of proven that I can do a lot with my art career, but I'm not at a point where I could leave my day job and balance my finances just with all this, even though that would be totally great. And then I've been doing, like, the work-life balance is always hard because that's the ultimate dream, just to be in your studio all day and have just be an artist and paint. But for me, I don't know if that's like the reality I want. I'd always want something outside of my studio to go to because I always want to interact and network and talk to other creative people. And being locked up in here all day isn't kind of what I want to do. I want to be out in the community. So, and I also don't want my work to be forced to pay for everything. Like, I want to make this painting because I want to make it, not because this is going to give me a couple $100 so I can buy some more supplies to make another commission that's going to give me some more money so I could paint this other commission. Like, I want to make art that's meaningful to me, and so this 7 Sins series is what I'm really passionate about, but I might not sell anything, so I don't want to just be in my studio pumping out work to make money to keep making work.
Yeah, that's really, I fairly recently went back to a day job after freelancing for about 1.5 years, and one of the main reasons was I was starting to make creative decisions based on money.
Yeah.
And I know it's a luxury, but I really hate that feeling of, like, the things I was doing for the most money I was the least interested in.
Exactly.
And it was sort of in my creative space, and I was like, no, I want to just make the things I make. It's a very lucky way to feel, but like that. Yeah,
you ask a lot out of your work or your art when you depend financially on it. So
yeah, it impacts it inevitably. Although it seems like you could. I mean, you have some really good stuff that, like, you could easily make prints of and replicate over and over. Yeah. I mean, you have some really good visuals that are. You could. I mean, I don't know how much you do this already, but it's those 2 series who are well represented on your site really seem like they're just begging to be merchandise, like T-shirts and stickers and all kinds of stuff. Like
totally,
that. Yep. But if you'd like done that on purpose, it probably wouldn't.
It'd feel a little bit different.
It'd be kind of gross somehow.
Yeah.
Like it would. I think it would sort of hurt the work a little bit.
I think so too. So going forward, if I have the opportunity to be here more, like in the studio making work, I'll take advantage of that. But I think there'll always be some sort of side project or side job or full day job. There'll always be something to ease that pressure of making my work pay for everything.
Well, you mentioned the idea of work-life balance, which I'm pretty sure is a myth.
I think so too.
But you have you love making art.
Yep.
And you do it all. You're productive. from what I can tell. But you do have a job for income, and you have responsibilities. I'm curious, just time-wise, do you have to specifically schedule time for you to have a personal life and like maintain relationships, or how does that work for you? Does that stuff slip away sometimes and you have to remember, or are you able to have that all sort of flow easily?
Yeah, I think sometimes that stuff does slip away. They'll like go hang out with the friends at the bar or a house party, because that clearly doesn't feed my life passion. The art does. So
you can tell everyone that when you're with them. Yeah. You guys aren't feeding my life passion, and then just storm
just
out.
Just head out. But I try to come to the studio every day after work. I'm done with work around 3, but it's salary, so some days it's a little later. But it's always usually late evenings is when I'm here in the studio. And my goal is to be here every day, and with that goal, that means usually I'm not here every day. So usually it's like 3 to 4 times a week. And I try to get here on the weekends too. But sometimes just getting here is the goal, because stuff happens once you're in the studio. So the hard part is just getting in the car and driving here.
Yeah.
But once I'm here, work happens. And things with deadlines help get the work done. So knowing that this show has to happen means I need to be here. And if I'm not here, then stuff isn't getting done, and that kind of ensues a little bit of panic. So the work-life balance happens when it's like, okay, these are the things that need to happen, and they have to get done, so what am I going to get them done? I'm notorious for having to-do lists. The more I have to do, the more stuff gets done. Like, I don't know.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, the busier I am, the more stuff happens.
Yeah.
So I think that's good that I have a day job, because that window, that time frame of getting stuff done shortens. And
there's more pressure on everything.
Yeah, and stuff happens. So, yeah.
So then if you work until 3 or whenever you're cut loose, and you come to the studio and you put in a bunch of hours, then do you still go hang out and have friends, or like where does that fit in the
that would probably be on the weekend.
Yeah. So
friends and family time's usually weekend.
And the rest is just focused work.
Yeah.
Are you able to have, does it happen, I don't know if it happens at your day job or not, but just mental time, there's the act of like looking at the materials and putting paint on things and pouring resin on things and making a delightful mess or whatever. But a lot of that work happens the rest of the day.
Yep.
Are you aware of when that's how does your mental process look? Do you take notes? What do you do with an idea if you're dressing a window or something and something comes up? So
I usually try to carry a sketchbook with me. A lot of my ideas are not sketches, they're written. So if you flip through my sketchbooks, it's just like notes and writing. But when I get an idea of a painting, I usually see the painting almost entirely, or I know kind of the ultimate goal. So I typically will see this, and then I just have to make it, which is, I mean, you kind of have to wait for the idea to come, but once I got it, then it's down on paper in my notebook, and I can always come back to it. But yeah, if I'm working on a project like this, usually one painting feeds the next painting. So this gluttony piece is feeding the one on the easel back there, and once that gets going, that's feeding the next one. So artwork tends to feed itself too.
I want to try and guess which sin it is, but I can't.
You'll get to it. You'll see it.
Probably pull it together.
But like the mental part of getting an idea, I usually have to schedule that. So I like to take the Artist Way class a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So I take that with Amy Eggenberger. She's a local life coach. So if I schedule time for mental/creative
so do you do like morning pages every day? Does that happen?
They don't happen every day, but that's the goal. But I take her class pretty frequently, because that's like, this is my hour and a half to like sit and figure things out. And it's easier if I'm taking a class or something's on the schedule for it to happen. So a consultation happens because it's on the schedule, and we're meeting Wednesday at 4, or a meeting with Levi to talk about all this stuff happens because it's on the schedule. So I never have quiet time unless I schedule it. So if I'm taking a class that helps that creative process, then that happens. So I'm more about scheduling or taking classes than I am about like, hey, let's just go to the studio and think about things, because that's not going to happen.
So I think this is a compliment. The description you give and just hearing about your sort of work style, you're like the opposite of the romantic idea of tortured artist who's lazing about all day and then just waiting for inspiration and struggling with all their various vices.
Yeah. I've heard that I'm the most organized artist that people have met.
What do you is that purely a source of pride for you? What do you think about that romantic idea of an artist is supposed to be broken and damaged, and that feeds into the work, which I'm not saying is true or
I still think that's a very common perception people have. One of my good friends was talking to someone that she knew, and she's like, no, I know a real artist. She's awesome. She does all this cool stuff. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, she's like, no, she has like a business. She does consultations. Like, she does things. And I think people who aren't in the art world still have that idea. So there's a little bit of like, no, like, stuff happens. I make work. I sell it. And I get a lot of like, do you actually make money off this? You know, like, there's still that perception. I think that being super organized is just kind of a natural thing for me. It's like part of my personality. So making sure all my ducks in a row, being organized, having scheduled times is just part of who I am as a person. It's not to like combat that idea of the torture artist, but it's just of my personality. So it's kind of like this duality of like the left brain and the right brain that happens to like work together really nicely in my favor. So yeah.
So, and have you been, is that being really planful? It can't be a word, but really organized. That's just sort of, you've been that way as long as you can remember?
Yeah, always organized, yeah.
Were you painting when you were really young? Like, was that the kind of, like, what was the...
I colored a lot, which kind of relates to what I'm doing now. It looks like a grown-up coloring book.
Yeah, you're riffing on even the kind of visuals that would have been in those.
Yeah.
Although now grown-up coloring books are totally a market.
Yeah.
That's a whole thing.
But I would wake up and color in my coloring book every morning, and my mom would try to feed me breakfast, but I wouldn't eat until I was done making my art, coloring my coloring books.
Nice.
So I think that translated into what I'm doing now. But as an artist, I've done other things like some bookmaking and some jewelry making, so I kind of have like my hands on a little bit of everything, but this is primarily what I focus on.
Do you have some idea of what success means? It's a pretty...
I think that's always the hardest question.
Abstract word. But because there's plenty of people right now who just be like, oh, you're very successful. You sell work and you have a studio and you get press. Like, that's...
I think those are all kind of like tangible or evidence-based ways to show you're successful. I think you have to be happy or really like what you're doing, and that's the ultimate success. Like, I like being in my studio and painting. Like, yeah, having a studio is great and that could be successful, but I really like being here and I like doing what I'm doing. So I think that's kind of like my personal success. I'm really making what I want to make. I'm notorious for having a big binder of goals. Like, it's like a big bucket list, but most of them are art related. And it doesn't matter that some contradict each other, or some are like way out there, or some are super easy. That's like more like a to-do list thing. So I have this huge list of goals that I want to do, and then every year I pick out like 30 goals I want to do, which is not, you can't do all 30. Usually it's more like 8 to 10. But I kind of shoot for the stars and see what kind of happens. Mm-hmm. And checking off that list of like 30 or so things doesn't mean I'm successful. It's if I enjoy doing that list, or if the outcomes of that make me feel good.
So if you were joyful and checked off nothing,
then that's a great year.
Really? You think that would? There's no stress from, like...
It's my own list, you know. I make the rules of what happens.
That's super true.
And usually stuff comes up that I didn't expect to happen throughout the year, and opportunities show up, and that wasn't on the list when I planned the list. So sometimes you just take a turn down a different path, and next year you can figure out how to write a press release or whatever that line item is that you want to do. So
I keep noticing behind you your bookshelf, and two things that jump out are the Strengths Finder book, and then the Emotional Intelligence, which are linked.
Yeah.
And so those are definitely highlighting it, but the talking to you, I hear a lot of, you've done a lot of sort of personal inventory taking of what are my skills and how do I apply them to this work, and like trying to understand yourself.
Yeah, I'm constantly doing that. If I'm not reading like a self-help book or creativity book, then yeah, I don't know. It's an odd moment in my life if I'm not reading one of those.
Can you trace that back to, I mean, do you feel like you're trying to, it's almost one of my secrets that I've read those, and I've read a lot of self-help books. And it's a mixture for me of trying to figure something out about myself, which I think is sort of an endless, I mean, I think that's what making art is too, is you're trying to answer some question that just probably can't be answered.
Yeah.
But also trying to understand just in general how people work and how to relate to them. Do you feel like you're learning new things about yourself and it's affecting the way that you interact with other people, like on a regular basis? How do you see those kinds of, I don't know, that kind of personal investigation informing your life? That's a
it's a big question.
Have at it. Or we can talk about pugs more too, because that's
not as deep.
They are adorable.
I think the self-help books totally let you dive into yourself as a person and uncover things that maybe you don't know or haven't explored. So it's kind of like a game. It's usually pretty fun.
And you're solving a puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of fear with uncovering things.
Yeah,
maybe
you don't know what's in there.
You don't want to know, but most of the time it's not that scary, and you find out you have new interests and hobbies.
It's funny you said the you don't know, because like I remember when I first read Awaken the Giant Within, that Tony Robbins book, and there was a part of me that was like, what if this giant's a monster? Like,
exactly.
I don't want to wake that guy up. It could be horrible. Like all my skill sets will lead to some terrible thing. Like that's such a weird.
Yeah, it's like I think it's a natural thing to be scared of the things you don't know. But
a lot of people then just go like, I'm not going to even find out.
I don't even want to open that door and
I'll just stay buried.
But I think reading those books and being able to like uncover things about you helps you better understand yourself, which then clearly informs the work that I'm doing, since my work has evolved so much over the past 4 or 5 years. So you can see as I get to know myself better and how I work and my process and the mediums and the things I want to talk about, like that has clearly changed as I continue to figure out who I am as a person. And then that allows me to better articulate what I do and who I am, because I'm always trying to discover a little bit more about me and why I do what I do. But they totally do provide that window into like how other people are or what they do. I was reading a book. It was more like a wellness nutrition book, but it was more self-help and affirmation based, and it talked about how ego shows up. And I was reading about that, and I could pinpoint different people in my life who have these things that they were talking about, different ego-based, I don't know, not necessarily problems, but just traits. So then I could better understand like why this person acts that way, because they're ego-focused. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I can understand them better.
So who are those people?
That's a good question. I'm keeping that to myself.
Yeah, that's really hard though, because that ego idea, there's an element of ego-driven something in making creative work.
Yep.
There's a part of you that's like, my idea is good enough that people should see it.
And pay for it.
And so that's inevitable, but there's this, I think, kind of common struggle for artists of, I don't want to be a slave to my ego. I don't want to get all my validation from outside, which is a sort of a risky area where you're like, I'm making work, and I think people will dig it, and I'm going to put it out there. Well, then suddenly you care about whether they like it or not, and that makes it hard for you then to keep making work, or it can change your relationship to the making of the work. You know, like you're getting some praise for your work, which feels good, but if you let it feel too good, then you won't.
Then I probably stop making work, because I'm just like, being like, hey, everyone likes it, you know. And if it was bad press, then I probably wouldn't be making work either. So I think there's this balance of like acknowledging, like, yeah, people are looking at it, or they've commented, good or bad, but that doesn't get me in the studio making artwork. Like, you can't let good or bad press or comments be like the gas to your car in your career. So I mean, it's good that people like what I'm doing and comment and share, but have to be in here making the work for it to happen, to put it out there in the first place.
So what do you do things, I mean, reading these books, to stay aware of the role your ego plays and keep it in line, or keep...
I think, the mentoring or mentorship with Jill helps. Any sort of like morning pages associated with Artist Way is helpful. Having real conversations with artists in the community about like, hey, this is where I'm at with everything. Affirmations are helpful.
Like in the mirror? Like
I don't talk in the mirror, but just reading them.
Well, now you say that like that's terrible. What if I like to talk to myself in the mirror?
That's cool too.
Should I be ashamed? Is that what you're...
I heard it's effective. I just haven't done it.
You should try it.
Okay.
It's weird.
I know. I think the weirdness is why I haven't done that yet, but I'm more about reading them reading them out loud. But yeah, I think those are kind of my core methods.
Yeah. Are there times you find yourself getting too filled up by someone else saying something really nice about your work? Like reading yourself in print or something? Have you noticed any like, oh, I like that, and then is that, I mean, I think there has to be some like that's okay too, like to feel good for a bit.
Yeah, like it's really awesome that it's printed in Minnesota Monthly. Like that's great, and I want to show people. So I'm like, hey, check out this magazine. Yeah. I was at the doctor's office yesterday, and I saw the Minnesota Monthly magazine on the wall in the little magazine thing. And as soon as my doctor came, I was like, I'm in that magazine. And so of course, like I flipped it open and showed it to her. So I think there needs to be a little bit of like, yeah, this is me, and it's cool, and I want to share it just as being an artist. But yeah, I don't know. I try to keep my ego in check a little bit, because once we move on to February issue, like, well, we're done with that, you know. So I don't know if that quite answers it, but
no, that does. I used to have a really hard time self-marketing theater projects I was working on, because it felt wrong somehow. Like, I don't know. I'm Midwestern too, so some of it is just like, oh, we don't brag about ourselves. Yeah. Like, that's not okay. But it took as literal as somebody just saying like, no one else is going to care as much as you about your work, so you have to tell them that it's worthwhile and worth seeing. Yeah. Which is a weird thing, I think, that a lot of artists need permission to promote their work and themselves. What they're doing. Yeah. I've grown to be a shameless self-promoter, but I try to do it in a humble way, so it doesn't look like Kate Renee. Like, I don't want people to be overloaded, so I try to find ways to balance that. So, like, I mean, we're drinking coffee mugs. Your name is on the mug.
Yeah, it's a Kate Renee coffee mug, and we're talking and having coffee.
You just said your name several times.
Exactly. So really, I'm self-promoting too.
So aggressive.
But I try to be like humble and honest about who I am, so it is coming from a real place, and maybe it shows like my passion about who I am and what I make. And I also try to take away methods that aren't helpful for marketing, that I feel like if I was receiving it, that would be annoying. For example, newsletters. Like, I used to do the monthly newsletters in the inbox. And so I'm sending out this newsletter as I'm getting other people's newsletters that I'm just hitting delete. Like, I'm not reading them because I'm not interested and they're boring. So why am I also sending out this newsletter thinking that people are going to care just as much? So I shifted from a monthly newsletter into, I'm just going to email you when there's an invite and there's something really cool I want you to go to. Because if every month you're getting this Kate Renee newsletter, you're going to miss when the really cool thing happens if you're seeing this every month and you just delete it. So I switch my strategies about self-promotion when I feel things aren't working or I can do it better.
That makes a lot of sense. Because then you're right, you're training them to go, oh, once a month I get to not care about what Kate's doing.
Exactly.
Congratulations. How exciting for me. Do you have artists who, in the run-up to where you are now, or currently living or dead, that people you take a lot of inspiration from, even if it's, overt and like folks you've stolen from? I love that. But other people who maybe would be surprising that you're influenced by too? Are there people who like top of mind for you, who you think about all the time? Or
so I don't have anyone particular that I focus on, but I really like graffiti or street artists. So any sort of like magazine or literature with like that kind of picture imagery is what I draw from. I do like Audrey Kawasaki. She's an artist who paints females on birch panel like I do and uses the wood as part of the work. Her work is very different than mine, but I think her work is really beautiful and I like to look at it a lot. So I don't draw or take anything from her, but she's an artist who I feel like I can relate with. But yeah, any sort of street work, because it usually has that edgy twist or has that kind of political message like my work does.
Yeah, and I can see the relationship to the work you're making and
the bright colors
graffiti.
and yeah.
Yeah, and it looks like there's nothing like talking about an artist's work when they're with you. There's a quality to your work of somebody was going to quickly do it and then get out of there before they were caught. Like that is one of the things that gives so much energy, I think, to street art, is that you can almost always feel this person who is like, I got to hurry up. It's part of the fun of the piece, is that there's a solid chance they were worried they weren't supposed to be doing this.
And maybe that's part of the message of the piece too, like the edgy quality to the work is like, maybe who talks about gluttony? Like, am I supposed to be talking about that?
Certainly, who accuses Winnie the Pooh of being a glutton?
I know, so that's kind of like that little tension,
aggressive.
Like the get in, talk about it, and get out sort of thing.
I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah,
he's definitely a binge eater.
He totally is. But I think that kind of relates to that street artist, kind of like quick make your tag or make your piece and get out.
Have you ever done that?
No, I haven't. I wish I had.
Are you too well behaved?
Yeah, I'm too well behaved, and I'd get caught if I did, but in another life I will.
Because you'd be a perfectionist about it too, so you keep coming back. I think I can clean this up a little bit. Fix it. And pouring resin over cement, and it wouldn't work. Really complicated.
Yeah.
I think you made the right choice of avoiding that.
I think so too.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking about this, and it's been a while now. So what I would ask is, where do you send people who want to see your work, buy your work? If somebody, I think you've done some commission stuff in the past, so if someone wanted to reach out, or where can people just in general follow and see what you're up to or what's coming next?
Sure. So I have a website, which is katerenee.com.
That your sister designed.
That she designed. I have an Etsy shop on there that is linked to it, so you can always click and buy anything you want. I always have open studio events, so Art World I'm open. We also have a holiday 2010 art block open studio event too, so I'm open twice a year, and I always sell work from my studio in person, and that's when I really get to talk one-on-one with people about what I'm doing. So if anyone wants to come see the process or look at these paintings, I'll have them here. And then
they could have their kids get upset.
Exactly, yeah. They could be like, Mom, look! I show with Gamut Gallery a lot, so that's where the Seven Sins series is going to be exhibiting. So Gamut usually has my work on display, usually at least once a year.
That's Gamut?
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah.
So in September, I'll have this on exhibit with them too.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for talking to me, Kate.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me.
Sure.
Well, here we are again. It's always such a pleasure. Remember when you tried to kill me twice? And how we laughed and laughed, except I wasn't laughing under the circumstances.